Hey, this is Chris. As we embark on our continuation of art history, we were talking about Giotto, and it was something I left out in the example of Giotto's Darker, Farther Away is Giotto was really one of the first artists to introduce the humanism, which is a focal point of what will become our goal to get to the High Renaissance. So right now we're in what's called the Proto-Renaissance. It's an early period just before the Renaissance. And there's a lot of different titles for the Renaissance. I wouldn't get hung up with that. So basically what's happening here is you're adding humanism. So what is humanism? Humanism is the psychological feelings that humans have. We have sorrow and laughter and happiness and sadness. And as there's grieving and suffering. And in the early Italian Renaissance, especially in Florence, yes, everything is Christian based. So there is a religious overtone. And it's basically saying, Jesus did this for me, and then he died for me and my sins. So now there's a grieving that I caused this pain onto someone else. And someone who does this, even though Giotto's first, and that's a massive step, the person who really takes this to another level to me is Donatello. And what Donatello does is, in early parts of his art, he has certain sculpture pieces, and they look like beautiful sculpture pieces in bronze. Nothing special about them. But when he does Mary Magdalene, and it's housed at the Duomo Museum, just about 2 minutes away from the Duomo Church in Florence, and that's where all the original artwork that was in the church and the baptistry is sitting. And I'm telling you, this is one of the more powerful pieces I've ever seen. What happens with Donatello's piece is instead of her being in stone, she's made out of wood. It gives it a softer, organic feel, and it's just beautiful. So let's talk about that and where we could go with this. So I left up on my picture Giotto and saying darker, farther away. And sorry about the scribbling with a charcoal. You think I should just skip it and just put in words in the video later? Oh, because he doesn't want to do the work. I see. Okay. So now you have Mary Magdalene, and you're sort of sketching her in, and I got to keep it small so she stays on the page, and she's just sort of sitting here. There's a hint of S-curve, just a little where you're going from one side of the face to the hand, that there's a hint of a movement, just a little hint going to the hip out here and then to the knee down here. So there is that S-curve still going on that we see in the early classical Greek sculptures. But as I start to shade her, now this is a sculpture piece, so I'm just going to say I'm going to just shade her darker on one side, just like Giotto would have, and I'm going to go ahead and put in some of her shadows and her shadow part of her body here. Okay, and I'll let it just disappear into the background. In fact, I'll let her disappear, even though you have to excuse me, because what I did here isn't actually invented during Giotto's time. The blending into the background is Leonardo da Vinci. Ignore I did that and just let me continue. So then you got the hands coming this way, and I'm getting to look there like this. And there's that little hint, and what you're doing is you're just kind of developing your drawing. And as you develop your drawing and you get rid of all the texture, and you have to make it as smooth as you can. What if you then did this? You see, humanism, because this is Giotto, now we have Donatello. Oh gosh, I can't spell. Donatello. I just looked at the screen and cheated. Okay? When you're looking at Donatello, what if I made marks that look like Mary Magdalene caused pain onto someone else and she was suffering? What if I took this charcoal and I started very lightly, and then I started to turn it and I'm pulling down. And I'm going to make the hairs even longer than they're supposed to. And I'm just going to drag the hair on her body. And everything's going to be weeping like melted wax. And I'm just going to kind of bring everything down. What if I made marks that were, and they could blur in times and then be sharp and vary, and just drag them down. There's so many ways to make a mark in a drawing that you could show something. A little flick, or a soft, graceful mark, using the point of the charcoal, smearing it with your finger, and then going back and sharpening just some of it. The beginning of expressing yourself as a contemporary artist with texture with a palette knife and using compressed charcoal or any kind of mark really starts in the early Italian Renaissance, and just before the early Italian Renaissance with Donatello's, and what I think Mary Magdalene, one of the all-time great pieces, because you have to keep in mind nobody did this before him. It's another thing for me to copy it and say, here, I can draw just like him. It's another thing to be first. And this is beautiful.